state Cleveland, which had been hit hard by the first subprime bubble and feared the consequence of a second bubble. In 2001, the City Council passed a law banning balloon payments and mandating counseling for borrowers who were seeking certain loans. The law also required lenders to submit key information, including the total points and fees paid on each loan. In response, the Ohio State Legislature, which was controlled by Republicans, passed its own much-maker law saying that only the state had the right to regulate lending. Mortgage lobbyists probably acknowledged that they had largely written the state's bill. Then a group of lenders called the American Financial Service Association sued Cleveland, arguing that the city's law was now illegal. A court ruled in favor of the AFSA in 2003. Cleveland's law was overturned. That same story played out in Oakland, Los Angeles, and elsewhere. Communities tried to strengthen state laws that had been watered down by lender lobbying, only to face lawsuits from the AFSA. The FSA dubbed this its municipal legislation program. In most of these battles, the AFSA's most public spokesman was its America's representative. From 2002 to 2006, America's, its executives, and their supposed and business associates donate at least $20.5 million to state and federal political groups, according to the Wall Street Journal. States that want to do something about subprime lending didn't fare much better. In the fall of 2002, Georgia Governor Roy Barnes, a Democrat, signed into law the Georgia Fair Lending Act, which prohibits loans from being made without regard for the borrower's ability to repay. It also provided assignee liability, meaning that the investment bank that securitized the loans and the inventors who wound up owning the mortgage could both be sued if the loan violated the law. The outcry was instantaneous. Mozilla called the new law egregious. Americans say that it could no longer do business in Georgia. A group of Atlanta lenders filed a class action lawsuit. The rating agencies jumped in on the side of the bankers, with S&P and Moody's, but saying they would no longer rate bonds backed by loans that were originated in Georgia. But the most crushing blow came from the national regulators, especially the Office of Trade Supervision and the OCC, which oversaw roughly two-thirds of the assets in national banks. Sidings win the bank against the states and cities that were trying to stop abuse lending. The two federal regulators assert something called preemption. What that meant in effect was that institutions that were regulated by the OTS or the OCC were immune from state or local laws. In theory, preemption makes sense. Companies always want to be able to play by one set of rules instead of having to adapt to 50 different laws in 50 different states. Federal preemption basically says that federal rules always take precedence over state rules. But in this case, there was no meaningful federal rule. Neither of these federal agencies replaced the preempted state laws with comparable binding consumer protection regulation of their own, wrote Patricia McCoy, the director of the University of Connecticut's Insurance Law Center in 2008. And the preemption doctrine was never intended to give banks free rein to make abusive loans to people who had no chance of being able to pay them back. But perhaps the most important thing was the messages it sent. It gave lenders a sense that they had a protector in the government, says Prentice Coates, who ran the consumer enforcement division in the Minnesota Attorney General's office until 2005. Preemption also became a recruiting tool for the regulators trying to expand their own empires. Incredible American financial institutions had the ability, under certain circumstances, to switch regulators, an idea that had long been promoted by Alan Greenspan. His essential belief was that having multiple, overlapping regulators was good for the system because, as he once put it in testimony before the Senate Banking Committee, it served as a valuable restraint, and only one regulator conducting inflexible, excessively rigid policies. The present structure, he added, provides banks with a method of shifting their regulators and effective test that provides a limit on the arbitrary position or excessive rigid posture of any one regulators. Henry Waugh, the comptroller of the currency took that idea a step further, rather than sit back and wait for institution to come to the OCC. He actively took up the advantages of being regulated by the agency he had. In early 2002, for instance, the OCC issues a press release with this startling headline: Comptroller calls preemption a major advantage of national bank charter. A former regulator says that he viewed his job as a salesman for the national charter. He would make sales calls. The OCC used preemption as its advertising. Just about a year after the OCC first began trumpeting the virtues of preemption, the ODS joined in, announcing that the thrifts it oversaw were exempt from the key provisions of Georgia's new law. The ODS move helped make the state's law moot. Either we will have an unlevel playing field and a rush of people to go get ODS charters, or we will see a leveling out of the playing field by having the state legislature change the law, said a spokesman for the mortgage lobby. Sure enough, by the spring of 2003, the law had been replaced by a much weaker one. The ODS had long asserted preemption when state passed laws that it didn't think its thrift should have to follow. But the early 2004, the OCC went all in, declaring that all institutions under its watch would be exempt from all state and local laws aimed at predatory lending. After Wachovia moved its mortgage company into its federally chartered bank in order to take advantage of the OCC's preemption policy. The state of Michigan argued that it should still be able to regulate Wachovia's local lending unit. Wachova sued the OCC filed a supporting brief. The fact went all the way to the Supreme Court, which in 2007 sided with Wachovia. And so it went. New Jersey, which passed a predatory lending law in the fall of 2003, repealed it a year later after the lending community, along with the rating agencies, followed the Georgia playbook. In New York, the OCC asserted preemption when then Attorney General Eliot Spitzer simply tried to get data from national banks in order to see if they were complying with fair lending laws. I think that reality is that the refusal to permit our inquiry, and the assistance of the OCC is helping the banks stop it, was symptomatic of a world there nobody want to look of anything, Spitzer later said. John Dugan, who replaced Hawke in 2004 as comptroller of the currency, would later argue that national banks were only a small part of the problem. He wasn't completely wrong. By the OCC's calculation, national banks originated 12.1% of non-prime loans between 2005 and 2007. But his argument missed that larger point. Preemption created competition between the OCC and the OTS, and the OTS, which regulate institutions like INDIMAC and WAMU, was indisputable a weaker regulator. Secondly, preemption means that even the state chartered lenders didn't have to curb their abuses because states were reluctant to pass off enforce strict rules for their institutions that federally regulated institutions were allowed to do. Say Kevin Stein, the associate director of the California Reinvestment Coalition, banks said, "We don't have to comply." The OCC said they don't have to comply. The state legislature said, if we can't pass a law that regulates federally chartered banks operating in our state, then we're not going to regulate state chartered tender because then they can't compete. It was a legislative and regulatory race to the bottom. Finally, subprime loans continue to make their way unchecked into the national banking system, thanks to segregation. It really didn't matter who originated them. States had no way of cutting off that all-important funding source, and the national regulator, with their energy focused on making sure that their institutions were free from pesky state laws, idly stood by. What none of the regulators could see was the most obvious fact of all. If cities and states all over the country felt the need to enact their own laws, as 25 states, 11 localities, and the District of Columbia had by 2004, according to a GAO report, didn't that suggest there was a problem that needed fixing? Even the FBI seemed to think so. In October 2004, Chris Swicker, the assistant director of the Criminal Investigative Unit of the FBI, told Congress that mortgage fraud is pervasive and growing. He explained the potential impact of mortgage fraud of financial institutions and the stock market is clear. If fraudulent practices become systemic within the mortgage industry and mortgage fraud is allowed to become unrestrained, it will ultimately place financial institutions at risk and have adverse effects on the stock market. Inventors may lose fight and require higher returns from mortgage-backed securities, and still the regulators remained unconfirmed. There was one half-hearted effort to enact a national law to curb some of the subprime lending abuses. But while some lenders, including America's and New Century, did want national legislation to avoid the constant need to bet back state and local laws, the powerful Mortgage Banker Association didn't put its weight behind a law. One former lobbyist says that the deciding factor was Angelo Mosillo, who told him, "No regulator is young to tell me what kind of products I can offer." According to the Wall Street Journal, Countrywide spent 8.7 million between 2002 and 2006 on political donation, campaign contributions, and lobbying to default anti-predatory lending legislation. Old school Republicans always felt here's the channel of commerce, and here are the corps, says Chris Oyer, them, and will kill you. As soon as someone starts to cheat to get market share and their market share gets bigger, well, guys are gonna cheat to get and get market share. That's why you have old school rules. Bad shit happens if you let the curbs down. For the few remember the whole world of mortgage and the concept of risk, those were surreal days. Dave sitting an old-fashioned mortgage banker with a homespun style runs the Arizona-based primary residential, which makes mortgage across the country. Sitting started in mortgage banking in 1988. Sorry, when he was 18, and aside from 1 year spent bagging groceries, he's never done anything else. He grew up in a world there making a loan was all about the form CS credit, collateral, capacity, and character. We thought of a loan like an airplane, he says. It couldn't fly unless it had all four parts. As he watched the growing insanity, he says he went from feeling scared to leave a CO to thinking, what good am I? Have I just been fooling myself that I'm doing a job? Holy shit, maybe these guys are no to something. Maybe paying for a home has nothing to do with the 4 Cs. When he started in business, there were 3 loan products. By 2005, there were 600. The rule, Sitting says, was bet on a mirror, and if here's fog, you got the loan. In 2005, Sitting began to dip his toe into the supreme market, although he insists on tight controls. Every supreme loan that was offered at a branch was underwritten again at headquarters. He still remembers the day in June 2005 he got a call from a wholesaler who brought his company's loans. This wholesaler was one of the largest organizations on the planet. Sitting, who is still in the business, won't name the company, other than to say they're not around anymore. They flew him to their headquarters because they want to talk to him. Around a conference table said a dozen men in suits. They said, "Dave, what's going on? Your company sells us the lowest amount of approved loans of anyone he do business with." Sitting recalls, because Sitting used this company's software, they could see that their system was approving loans that Sitting was then rejecting at headquarters. "Oh, it's simple," Sitting told them. "We check the credit at corporate, and not a lot make it through. That's why we flew you out," one of the suites responds. "We don't like that. You need to trust our system, and if you do, your volume will go up by leaps and bounds." "How do I know the borrower will pay?" Sitting asked. "You don't need to worry about that," they responded. The next day, Sitting says he got the trade tapes for the supreme loans he was selling, which showed the price various buyers were willing to pay. June had been a big month for him. Primary residential had underwritten 9 million of subprime loans. Usually, the offer was close to what the buyer had been promising verbally, but this day the offer was surprisingly low. So Sitting called up the guy he dealt with. "I say, something is screwed up in the secondary market," he recalls. He said, I've been fielding those calls all days. It was a moment when the subprime market was tightening up, almost as if the bubble was coming to an end. Although the moment didn't last very long, it was enough for sitting. Dave, the man said, I like you, get out. Excuse me, Sitting replied. He thought to himself, I just came from a meeting where people were telling me not to turn down loans. The man said, if you ever say I said this, I'll deny it, but if you want your company to be around, you will not found another subprime loan. There is going to be a bloodbath. And so, Sitting says he called an emergency board meeting and he shut down his tiny subprime business. Even, even thought his firm had just spent 4,000 400,000 buying some necessary software. All my friends in the business were laughing all the way to the bank, he says. Over the next 2 years, he watched his business pals make millions and buy private jets and mansions. He remembers thinking to himself, what the crap?